Welcome to the Clearly Christian Podcast with Dr. Cy Smith. It's time to know more so you can say no more. It's time for the Clearly Christian Podcast. Here's your host, Dr. Cy Smith.
I'm Dr. Cy Smith, and this is Clearly Christian, a podcast about what it means to see the world from God's perspective and the impact this has on training the next generation to live a life consistent with the biblical worldview. If you've been listening and you like the show, I would encourage you to hit the subscribe button and leave a review. Again, that'll let others know the show is worth listening to and certainly help advance the cause of Christian education and spread the word. So thank you very much. Today's extra credit version of the Clearly Christian Podcast is a deeper dive into the chalkboard points from our recent conversation with Darren Long. He's the superintendent of the Christian Academy School System of Louisville, Kentucky. We talked about the importance of making leadership personal even as your organization grows. And we used the idea from the best-selling book Unreasonable Hospitality, and that is acting smaller even as you get bigger. And now for some further thoughts and questions on this episode, let's bring in our producer and our host, Bryan Lefelhoc. So, Bryan, what'd you think of the show? And I have some questions for me today.
I thought the show was an amazing program for business leaders as much as educational leaders. Anyone certainly in the educational world will want to hear it. And like you said in the show, they're not always thinking about some of these business concept goals and strategic plans and things of that sort. But just business community, business leaders, CEOs, presidents of organizations. He is such a wealth of knowledge in the business world. It's obvious. It shows in a school his size. They have 500 employees.
Yeah, and that's, like I said, that's more than a lot of schools have students.
Yeah.
And so can you imagine 3,000 students to monitor, he said, and then also 500 employees to keep track of. And it really is, like I said, when I think about schools as a business, I really think about Cal because, boy, you better have it together to run a business that size. And he said, oh, we're not that big, or he made some casual comment like that. I thought, no, you really are a big business.
Yeah, and so he's learned a lot, and he uses those techniques, and he's a CEO of a large organization. So let's think about it that way. A lot of CEOs, and we know a few, sit in their corner office. They know what they're doing. They do their job. You're the CEO, superintendent at Mansfield Christian School. You've been doing this a long time, like 30-some years, right?
Yep,
34 years.
Yeah.
You know what you're doing. Do you really need feedback? Darren talked a lot about listening to others and talking to others and learning the right path forward. You don't need that, do you?
Yeah, right, yeah. You certainly have to chuckle when you hear something like that because it is so easy. And a lot of authors have written about things called blind spots. And I think there's another author that writes specifically about how the art of getting feedback and how to look for it and things like that, because all of us have probably, unfortunately, learned that lesson the hard way. And you're exactly right, because it's easy to get comfortable where you're at, especially if you've been doing it a long time, especially maybe even some of those businesses, they're the actual owner. They created the product. They started it up, much like you are in your spot there. And so nobody knows it better. Who's going to tell me, what I should do to make changes or this, that, and the other? What do they know, right? I literally created this product. And sometimes if you've been at an organization, even like a school, for this long, you didn't necessarily create the product, but a lot of the school's identity is taken from you and your vision and your strategic plan and blah, blah, blah. So again, you feel some sort of ownership, and then you might question, do they have the capacity to come along and provide you feedback? But boy, that is really a dangerous place to be in because, like I said, our propensity, even as leaders, is to be, extremely focused on the goals. And sometimes you can miss very, very important things happening around you. And the bigger you get, and the more people like Darren, 500 employees, well, there could be a serious pattern emerging somewhere with 25, 30, 40, 50, maybe even 100 employees. And that had better be on his radar, right? And it's got to be on my radar. And it may look like a small piece of the pie, but if I ignore that thing that is starting to bubble up there, and maybe it's not even a negative, maybe it's a positive, but if I ignore it, wow, it's to my peril. So I better be open to that feedback and say, you know what, maybe I don't have a great way to get it right now, and I'm looking for ways to get it, but I better be open to it, and I better at least communicate to my culture that I welcome feedback, because if they perceive you as you're not welcome to feedback, you're going to be in trouble, because I guarantee things are going on that you need to know about and you don't, because people are not getting that information where it needs to be.
Darren talked a lot about the surveys that he sends out, and I imagine if that culture is not right, the information that comes back might be wrong. People are afraid to tell the truth. People tell you something that's not really happening because they're worried about pushback or things of that sort. What do you do to foster a strong culture? How can you create that where people feel like they're trusted and they're heard? What do you do there?
I thought he made two good points. And I think we have to recognize these right now. He talked about face-to-face, and then he talked about, like you said, surveys, which are not face-to-face, but at least they're letting people connect in some capacity. Because some people, and I heard a good podcast on this recently, some people, especially the millennial parents who we have right now, they're not overly excited about face-to-face sometimes. For them, for the average today's millennial parent, they consider social media connections to be meaningful, where they'll say, listen, I follow along with my third grade teacher's post on Instagram. I get the school's website. I like the things that they like. I share the stuff that's going on at Mansfield Christian School. So I'm really socially connected with Mansfield Christian School, even though you and I would say in our generation that, boy, I've never shake that person's hand before, and they've never been to a school event. So I feel like they're very disconnected. And they say, nope, I'm very connected. I'm just connected in a different way. So you have to do both of those things. We have to be out there, all school leaders. You better be at all the meet and greets you can. We have a big event, school family picnic coming up this Friday night. We'll get 700-800 people there easy. And, man, I have to be in as many conversations as I can be in, even if it's just to introduce myself and welcome them and shake hands. And I don't try to do that in a very, political way. Hey, vote for me. I don't want to make it sound callous and shallow, but I do want them to know that, hey, we're glad you're here. You're part of our school family. No matter how big we get, you're welcome. One of the things we do at that event is nobody pays for anything. Your meal is free. Your admission is free. Everything is free. This is just like, going to a family picnic. You don't bring any money. We just give you whatever you need, and we want to welcome you in there. So you have to do that, but then you also have to, like he said, get out those surveys, welcome some electronic feedback, even if it's anonymous, but give them a chance to interact with you. And, it may be as simple as likes and dislikes, but give them a chance to engage with your school. And like I said, whether that's surveys or stuff that's on social media, you have to recognize what communication that they want, especially as millennial parents, and be willing to go there with them. And I'm talking to myself there, because as a Gen Xer, that's not me. I'd much rather just give speeches and let you come up to me afterwards and ask me questions, or host a round table, right? Which are all still good. But sometimes, that group, parents are just so busy now, they don't want to take time out for another meeting, so these town hall approaches, they sound great on paper, and let's let all the families come in, and you anticipate you're going to get 200 families, and 35 families show up, and you go, oh my word, we really missed it. Why didn't anybody want to come to this event? It's not their method of communication. They're just not that interested.
So that goes to the idea there in a podcast about acting smaller and taking a big organization and bringing it down to the customer level. I'm interested. Darren talked a lot about, he mentioned they have 500 employees, but every 3 years they have 150 new ones. That's the way the world is. A lot of cycling and employment and staffing and job changes. How important is it? And he talked about this a little bit, but how important is it for you? You have a lot of employees there too. To know every single teacher. Yep. You have 150 employees. To all your staff and all your teachers, they're doing your work. Without them, you can't get your job done. But you can't know them all, but you have to. How do you generate that kind of personal relationship?
Oh, I wish I had it in a can and I could say, this is how I do a great job of that. And Darren probably would say the same thing, because I don't think any of us ever feel like we're doing that to the extent that we should, because we're so focused on, and I don't want to sound selfish, but and say, we're so focused on our agenda, because that makes it sound bad. Because like I said at the end of the episode, I have to be focused on only what I can do. That's what I get paid for. The first grade teacher does not get paid for strategic planning of the organization. She doesn't get paid for the budget. She doesn't get paid to watch the horizon. She doesn't get paid for legal legislative issues like school choice and things like that, right? So she has to focus on what she does. I have to focus on what I do. But you're exactly right. I have to know, are you doing that part of our mission really, really well? And as I've said many times, we are an educational institution. So it's my job to ensure that my first grade teacher is really, really good. And in that sense, I've got to get to know them. And if they need anything from me, they've got to be able to have that open door policy and provide feedback and things like that. So it's very difficult. The least we can do, of course, is connecting with them at the opening of the school year. Of course, you have a lot of orientation meetings where you're trying to meet people and catch up, and you're having a lot of group gatherings where you're trying to get around and literally shake hands and welcome people and make sure they feel special. I try to every year send, some years I'm better at it than others, I try to send them all birthday cards at least. And again, notes of encouragement, or let them, emails that I'm praying for them or something like that, letting them know they matter. I meet every Monday morning with all of them, and that is a big win, because every Monday morning from 7:30 to 8, all of the teachers meet with me. And we have a professional development time. And I go through, usually it's a book study or what I'm learning in terms of Christian education, biblical worldview and integration in the classroom. Could be even something on adolescent psychology, how the brain learns. It could be anything related to teacher PD, and of course doing this in a Christian school. And then I share that for 30 minutes. Well, then part of that is some banter back and forth, where I'm saying, hey, does anybody have any thoughts on that? How do you do that in the first and second grade? I'll call on the kindergarten teachers, or I'll call on the junior high teachers. And so there's some interaction that takes place every Monday morning from 7:30 to 8. That at least keeps me connected face to face with them. So it's not so, wow, I haven't seen the superintendent in 2 months, which could happen depending on what part of the building that you're in. So at least I get to touch with them visually in a small room every week, and that certainly helps. So you're always looking for things like that you can do to increase your touch points with them.
And then I think my final question, again, I mentioned how much of a business-focused podcast this was and how much a business folks can learn. And so I'd like them to learn from you a little bit. Goals. Darren talked about strategic plans and achieving their numbers and hitting their goals, and how he even mentioned once he has 8 campuses. If one doesn't quite take care of business, he's got 7 more to follow up, but it's a business, and you have to, we've talked about it before, you have to make money and to stay excellent. You have goals, you have excellence, you can't let go of excellence. Your students expect it, your parents expect it. What happens when you're not hitting your goals? Help a business owner who struggles with, what do I do now? Consequences, things of that sort. It's got to be different in the world of education. And how do you make sure that your whole team is getting the job done the way they're expected to?
Great question. And like we said, businesses, there has to be accountability measures. Schools, there has to be accountability measures. We all have to. We all can't say this is going to be excellent and then not hold people accountable for that. So you're exactly right. There has to be consequences. We have to be willing sometimes to have those hard conversations. Look, here's the key. And I think we've all maybe learned this, those of us that have gotten there. Maybe we've learned it the hard way, but here's what I've learned over the years. The key is you can't go into those meetings where what you're sharing is this epiphany moment for the person on the receiving end. Like you're sharing something they've never heard before, or that you're sharing something that is going to be completely new to them. Like, guess what, Johnny or Joe, whatever your role is, you're not hitting the mark. And they all of a sudden say, what? I had no idea, right? Well, that can't take place. And that's the old way of doing business. That's the old model in education. You had one evaluation summary every year. It usually came connected to your contract in the spring and renewals. And you usually got an A or a B or a C or something like that in the school vernacular. And then you got your contract renewed. And if not, you got put on probation or you got non-renewed or something like that. Now what you have to do is, and what we've put in place is, do these self-evaluations and goal-setting times either over the summer or in the fall, and do them in connection with the actual employee so that we set out some goals and some agreed-upon accountability measures well in advance before the school year starts, no later than August. And we say, you know what, Joe, this is what a successful school year looks like for you. We agreed on that. You said you were going to do this. I said you were going to do this. We sign off on this at the beginning of the year. This is where you have to be. And then when you come around in the spring, we can look at that document together, or we can have that discussion together. And Joe sees, or Joe even admits, wow, I set out to do these things in August. I didn't hit any of them. And it was my job to track these things, my supervisor's job to track these things. And then Joe says, ooh, okay, I realize there's going to be some consequences because I didn't hit any of these goals, which were achievable. And that's a whole different conversation. Now I'm not getting blamed for those consequences. Joe knows that we were in this together, Joe, and I'm held consequences by my school board. You're held consequences by me. You didn't hit any of the markers that you and I set out to hit to make us better. So here's the consequences, whatever those are. Could be big, could be small, could be growing pains, but we got to get there together. Well, again, great conversation, Bryan. Good questions. Thanks again for joining me today on this extra credit episode of Clearly Christian Podcast. And I trust that now, again, you know more about acting smaller even as you get bigger. And as I say again, if you like the show, let us know by following along and subscribing, hitting that like button. Let others know that it's a good show. It's worth checking out. That certainly makes a difference, and I would appreciate that. Remember, the only way we're going to turn things around in this country is to increase the number of people who hold a biblical worldview. And the greatest hope we have to get there is Christian education. Again, I'm Dr. Cy Smith, and this has been Clearly Christian.
Thank you for listening to the Clearly Christian Podcast with Dr. Cy Smith. Hear more episodes at clearlychristianeducation.com. If you'd like more information about Christian education in your neighborhood, or if you're interested in education opportunities at Mansfield Christian School, or if you agree with Dr. Smith and want to help him in his mission to influence and awaken Christian America, you can send Dr. Smith an email through the clearlychristianeducation.com website. Message him on the Clearly Christian LinkedIn or Facebook page, or call the Clearly Christian Connection line at 419-756-5651. This has been the Clearly Christian Podcast with Dr. Cy Smith on clearlychristianeducation.com, brought to you in conjunction with Mansfield Christian School, a Bryan Media production.